Welcome, my friends. This is called Cage Talk. My name is Robin Black. Dark Side of the Cage is a 10-episode series on Vice that examines some of the most fascinating stories in the worlds of mixed martial arts and combat. Every week, I go even a little bit deeper with a series we call Deeper into the Cage. And in that series, we have some longer form conversations. And here are those conversations in their entirety. We're talking about Evan Tanner. The episode of Dark Side of the Cage is called The Last Days of Evan Tanner. And so we get to chat with two of his close friends when he was alive and training, Malachi Friedman and Ian Daw. And we get to talk with David Mullins, a sports psychology consultant, just about risk-taking and some other fascinating things. And we use Evan as a jumping off point to examine some really, really fascinating things. So enough talk, Robin Black. This is Cage Talk, the final days of Evan Tanner. Ian Daw, my friend, it is so good to see you. I miss you, brother. How are you?
Likewise, a great event. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good. When I was starting kind of this episode, I was talking about how you were in your third fight, and I was in my first. We were main training partners, and Evan had dinner with us and was around cornering you that weekend. That was my first time meeting him. Where were you at in your sort of life as friends at that point?
So I had moved back to Canada. I was staying with Evan for a while, training, and I think I had come back late December, and then we communicated like probably every day, pretty regularly. And then that was fight, I think, in July, right? And he came up for that. So that was the last time I saw Evan too, unfortunately.
Yeah. That was when we went to start this series, telling Evan's story was a big one for me. When the series producer sat down with me, Dave, and said, what story should we try to tell? I wanted to tell Evan's right away, and I wanted to reach out to you immediately. And there's something about him, and I didn't know him at 1/100th like you knew him, but there's something you just want to make sure you get it right, because there was something just very special about him.
Yeah, and I think when people ask me about Evan, I have no delusion that Evan was different, and I feel like the Evan I knew was the only person I've met like Evan, and that was at a different stage in his life. But I feel like the one consistent thing that most people who are close with him or knew him at any stage of his life was like there was just nobody like him, and I think he's just a special guy, and unique in that sense that he was just his own man, and that really was conveyed to everyone who came across him.
Later today, I'm going to talk to my friend David Mullins. He's a sports psych, and he's going to give us some insight into what makes certain people risk takers and adventurers, thrill seekers, and these different aspects. But that was a part of who Evan was, right? Like a true adventurer of life.
Yeah, I feel like, again, always hesitant to speak for Evan, just because he was such a unique guy. But I feel like everything he did was just part of the search, right? And he was seeking answers, and fighting was a part of that, and it allowed him to go on adventures, just as fighting itself was an adventure for him. So I think that's absolutely, a good description. He was an adventurous character.
In that last couple of years, so, and we talk about it a lot. The funny thing about doing a show like this is you got like 45 minutes. And in 45 minutes, you try to set up a bit of the beginning of somebody's life, tell some of the great moments, and you try to give insight into somebody. And that's just not enough time to do so, But some of the big points that when you talk to yourself, other good friends of his, family, people who are along for the ride, there are these points in his life that are primary colors. You know, he learned to fight and became a world champion. He went into some very dark places, almost on exploration. And by the time you had met him, he was really at a point in his life where he wanted to have a positive impact in the world. Is that the feeling you got?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the Evan I was fortunate enough to spend time with was getting to where he wanted to be. You know, he had rid himself of a lot of the vices that have kind of plagued some of his, earlier relationships and guess maybe success in the sport. And he had lots of, plans for the foundation. And, eventually he wanted to have a family and kind of pass on all of the lessons he gathered throughout his travels, throughout his adventures, throughout his life, and kind of, maybe rid his kids of some of the downsides that he experienced. So most definitely, I feel like he was in a really good space when I was able to spend time with him.
Why do you think it is that when he would share honestly on the earliest stages of social media, MySpace, like 80% of people watching this have no idea what MySpace is, but yet when he would share his real meaningful thoughts on there, it really spoke to people. People really connected with him. Why do you think that is?
I think because it was just the genuine article, right? And I feel like he didn't hide his successes as much as he didn't hide any of his failures or shortcomings. And I think, as initially a fan and a reader of his blogs, I think the message that was conveyed so clearly was, this is an individual who has his flaws, but despite all of the issues and shortcomings, he's managed to find success and meaning and value. And when I read his blogs, some of it was quite, like you said, quite dark, and he shared a lot of his lows. But as a reader, to me, it wasn't necessarily negative as much as it was an honest reflection on what he had experienced. And I was never left concerned, right? I was always, interested and more invested in this character and eager to see what was next. And I think he had a very special way of communicating that in a way that anyone could relate to, regardless of, I wasn't fighting at the time, but when he wrote about fights, I felt like I understood, and his drinking and some of the issues he shared with like gambling and relationships, maybe not issues that I had experienced, but he conveyed it in a way that I think almost anyone could relate to, which was what made him such a special guy. And, that's MySpace is how I met Evan. That's how I began corresponding with him and eventually led to being roommates.
Living with him in Vegas.
Wild.
Yeah. Think of that. But you said that he was somebody, I'm paraphrasing, but somebody who had his flaws, but was able to, despite them, kind of find successes. Aren't we all ultimately just people who have our flaws and are searching for meaning and trying to be successful despite them?
Yeah. And that's, I think Evan was a bit of a lighthouse in that way. And again, I think I still talk and communicate with people who are part of Team Tanner or people who are fans of his blogs going on how many years now. Yeah. And there's no shortage of people who, people have named their children after Evan. There's people who still share his blogs and he was very, very impactful. And I feel like the messages he conveyed were ones that everyone could relate to and were honest and inspiring in a way, despite, sharing all of the shortcomings and issues.
Put yourself in his shoes. Impossible to imagine. We try to be empathetic, and empathy is to imagine what it's like to be you, or what it's like to be somebody who might be watching this. If we try to think what it would be like to be him, it's very difficult, but you attempt to it, and imagine you are somebody reaching out in the world through this new technology, MySpace, and some kid in Canada who's wrestled and fighting is like, I want to fight. How do you end up from a guy, responding to his blogs, to living with him in Vegas, and then him cornering you when we're in Canada years later?
It's so surreal, and in a lot of ways, it seems unbelievable, and the odds are obviously stacked against those that relationship coming to the extent it was. But I think, when I started corresponding with Evan, a lot of it was about what he was sharing in his blogs and things I identified with. And as the kind of correspondence and relationship grew, I expressed an interest more in fighting. And then Evan said, when I had booked my first fight, he said, when you're fighting, if you want to come train, you're more than welcome to come to Vegas. And even prior to that, we had initially, when we were corresponding, he had the Team Tanner Foundation, the home in Oregon that he wanted to use for, up and coming fighters, maybe some young guys that were financially strapped, and that fell through. So I think Evan was ready to kind of give back to the next generation. And although the fighter house didn't pan out, there was an opportunity to kind of help somebody out to the degree that he wanted to. And fortunately, kind of right time and right place for myself. But I think, there's no shortage of people that corresponded with Evan. And I still see posts to this day where people I sent him messages on MySpace and he always responded. So I think that was, he spent a lot of time on MySpace, and there's no shortage of people out there that he corresponded with and had genuine relationships with. Like I said earlier, people have named their children after him. He's changed so many lives. I was just able to right time, right place, and kind of took advantage of the offer when it was extended.
At that time, you and I were training together every day. We were like number one training partners, and you're one of my very closest friends. And we started to hear rumors that day that Evan may have died. And then we didn't want to believe that was so. And I remember I was the one who kind of had to tell you that I think it was true. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
And then we went out. Sam Zakula, who was one of our coaches, and a few other people, we went out to a Chinese restaurant and just sat there. It's just, that's a surreal thing with any friend or anyone, mentor, family member. That was just it's one of the reasons I really wanted to do this episode and get it right for you,
Yeah. And I remember that day. I think will stand out to me forever. Partially because to me, in the back of my mind, obviously I knew it was true. But also knowing Evan a bit in my mind, he was a bit of a superhero enigma of sorts. And there's no shortage of stories of experiences he had that easily he shouldn't have survived, and he did. So I always kind of held out that little bit of hope that things didn't turn out the way that they did. But that's some other people who were close with him said, looking back on his life, I think he'd be happy with it. Obviously he didn't intend to die, and that wasn't what his mission was out there, but he passed doing what he loved. He was out in the desert on
an adventure. Maximum adventure.
And maximum adventure comes with maximum risk, right? And I think he rode that line, and I think he rode that line most of his life. So maybe that's just me trying to make peace with it. But surreal phone calls and kind of tragic.
It makes sense that you guys connected because there's a poet in you. There's an adventurer in you, you're a good-hearted person. Like, it made sense that you guys would be friends and would be close during that time. If he walked out of that desert, what do you think he would have done next? What do you think the next weeks and months and years, what would he be doing today?
Honestly, I think about that all the time, and I miss Evan so deeply. And I think, especially the last few years, I'm always curious as to what his opinion on, the state of the world and state of humanity would be, because he had such a unique perspective that I feel like his input would be invaluable. In regard to his plans after returning from the desert, so not sure if you're aware, but obviously we had our fight, and Evan and I went back to the hotel afterwards. And the whole weekend, essentially, when we were back in a room, he was researching for the trip. Like, this wasn't an impromptu decision. He didn't just decide to go out ill prepared, right? He got a new motorcycle that he knew would have all the storage he needed. He had all of his supplies, and unfortunately, Mother Nature had other plans. But he was meticulous in his preparation for that outing, and particularly with his health. He had connected with a doctor that, and I think he was going to start some medications to address some of his like hormonal issues and medical issues that were a bit unaddressed. And part of his mission in the desert, he was looking for gold, like actual treasure. Yeah. And part of that, I think, Evan also had a dream of getting back the middleweight title, and I don't think he ever lost sight of that. And as far as I was aware, and what he communicated to me, he was going to get back, get healthy, get back into training, and make a run at the middleweight title.
Yeah, some we are where we are, and the path that unfolds for everybody is where it is, and it makes sense in its own way, But thank you for catching up with me and sharing these things. And thanks for contributing to Evan's story in Dark Side of the Cage. It's a wonderful story, and I really hope people see it and see just a little tiny bit about what made him special.
Yeah, such a unique guy, and I'm so happy that his story continues to be told, because I feel like there's so much value. And I think, the next generation of fighters and just people in general can gain a lot of value from his story. So I really appreciate you reaching out and having me be part of this. I'm very fortunate.
I love you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
David, good to see you again. We chatted about Diego Sanchez last week and gurus. Thought it would be great to chat again about the great Evan Tanner. In the episode, we look at a lot of his life, and people always described him as an adventurer, a curious adventurer, and others described him as risk taker. Is that all a spectrum? And is there a point at which being adventure and going too far, what is that? What is that about?
It's a real thing, right? So there's I did a lot of research on this actually during my studies on sports psychology, as I was already, before I got into working in MMA, I was already focused on MMA while I was doing my studies, and on that idea of it is a high risk sport. And there are many other high risk sports out there, but what makes an athlete want to go into those high risk sports? Because with the Evan Tanner example, and there are others like Evan Tanner out there as well that we can think of in that high risk kind of thrill seeking kind of way of living their life. We kind of think, oh, has fighting caused them to be more like this? Or like it's to me, it's not that. To me, it's more, this is just an outlet. MMA has just been an outlet for their personality type. So there's some, what I think is fascinating research was done on this whole idea of sensation seeking, right? So it's been broken down by Zuckerman many decades ago now into 4 different components of sensation seeking, and we kind of score, everyone can kind of, there's a test you can do. Everyone scores high or low or medium, somewhere in that scale for each of the 4 components. And as we're talking through these, you can kind of think of where Evan Tanner would have fit into that scale, and where other fighters that you might be fans of or be aware of, where they might fit in that scale as well. It might make more sense, the way things work. And it's an interesting way to look at ourselves as well. So in terms of the sensation seeking, there are four different components. So number one, like the idea of thrill and adventure seeking. So we either score high to low on that scale for thrill and adventure seeking. And I mean, yeah, in terms of Evan Tanner, I don't know the guy, never met the guy. I was a fan of his way back, even before he won the title. And but you can imagine he would score high on that scale, right, for thrill and adventure seeking. So that's one. And some people, I myself, I think I would score low on that scale. You know, so everyone's different. There's no right or wrong. It's just who you are. And why we do that, why we score high or low on these different scales, don't know. Just who we are. Why are we the way we are? It's difficult to put to kind of break that down. And you see that, I see that clearly with my kids now. It's like they're totally different personalities, and they're just little kids. So it's like, what makes us who we are? Lots and lots of factors, to the point where there's almost no point in trying to understand. It's just we are what we are. But so thrill and adventure seeking, number one, and that's one. Experience seeking, number two. So seeking out experiences, novel, unique experiences, being open to those. You would score from high to low on that scale. And again, for someone like Evan Tanner, we can imagine he would have scored very high on that scale of experience seeking. Then there's two others then, in terms of how they kind of shape how the other two look. So the first one is disinhibition. So like, think of someone who is, their inhibition is
lampshade
low.
on the head. Lampshade on the head at the party.
Yeah. Exactly. So someone with their disinhibition is high. You can again, that would fit. That makes sense. That people with that kind of high disinhibition rating are going to live their life in a very different way to people with that low rating. And then the last component is boredom susceptibility. So how do you rate on that? Do you get bored easily? Do you not get bored easily? If you get bored easily, you need to go and find some thrill and find some excitement quick. You can't just sit alone. You can't just be on your own. Whereas personally, I would have a low boredom susceptibility. I can just be on my own. I can be comfortable. I don't need to be actively all the time doing something. I can be with myself and be comfortable in that way. Other people
a lot of fighters that we see are constant, whether it is the fight or some other activity or the party or whatever. They get bored real easy and need constant stimulation. And Evan Tanner presumably with one of these.
Again, like, without knowing the guy, because I didn't know the guy, but I would predict he would have scored high on all of those, right? Which sounds like a bad thing, but it's not. It's not like this is the bad thing. It's just the way some people are versus other people. Because those people that are high in all those would see people that are low in all of those, or medium to low, would see them as boring, would see them as dull, whatever, So it's not like one is right and one is wrong. What gets really interesting is when you go behind into the brain, into the chemicals involved, because people that score high on this scale, this sensation seeking scale, they tend to have lower levels of cortisol, for example, like the stress hormones. So lower level, even though they're adventure seeking, thrill seeking, and in experience seeking, when they're in those high thrill, high adventure moments, the cortisol levels are actually lower than other people would be. Their stress levels are lower, right? They're more relaxed in that situation than others would be, and their dopamine levels are higher. The dopamine, which we would relate to pleasure, that's higher for those people in those situations. So it's not just that they're drawn to them, it's that they're able to perform in them better, if you want, than other people would be. So
Which is
that's
fascinating.
useful when you think of certain sports or certain like high risk, like fighter pilot or MMA fighter or many other things. It's going to be useful to have, high dopamine levels, low cortisol levels in those really intense thrill-seeking situations.
And not only in the fight, which is great that you'll find pleasure in these moments and feel less stress, but to get into that fight requires tens of thousands of repetitions of the high stress thing, and training for a lifetime. And what do you train at? Things that you enjoy and don't find so stressful that you avoid. So becoming great is directly linked to this as well, because you have to practice so much at what we would all consider a high stress thing. And to do that, it's a lot more enjoyable if it's low stress and high dopamine.
100% true. But then there are some negative side effects, or not side effects, but negative kind of
Consequences.
Consequences. Perfect. For this kind of personality type, this person who scores high on this sensation seeking scale, because when the sport is gone, and the sport leaves us all, right? And the sport by its nature, and I'm the sport of MMA, I mean, obviously in this case, it does tick all of those boxes, just the nature of that sport, including, like you're saying, the training, and then obviously the fights and the journey and the whole thing. When that's gone, that doesn't mean that, like, just because the sport's no longer there and you have to retire, doesn't mean that you switch off all of those personality traits and that high for those four components. They don't just switch off because it's done now. They're still there, and MMA happened to be an outlet and I would say like, for the most part, a positive outlet and a kind of a disciplined way of channeling all of those things into somewhere positive where you can get some rewards from it. When it's gone, it's still there. So you have to replace that. And that's what we see many fighters fall into the traps with substance abuse and other things, where they replace those, the dopamine hit with that they might have got from the experience and the thrill. They get it now from chemicals, or from, in Evan Tanner's case, still thrill seeking, still adventure seeking, still pushing himself to an extreme kind of a situation. So you can kind of be the dilemma of it then, right?
When you look at, I mean, the episode of Dark Side of the Cage on Evan, when you look at it through this lens, there's a guy seeking the thrill and accomplishment of the fight. Then he goes through a dark period, which is connected to a search, a desire to push limits, to push yourself to see what, and he talked about it. He wanted to see how far he could go down into dark places. And then you see the championship accomplishing great things as well as a direct result. And then his death, where he was on an adventure. And I'm not giving anything away by saying this, because I think this is in the ether already. There was a lot of people who wondered, was he deciding to end his life? And most people close to him do not think that at all. There's not really any evidence of that. He was on an adventure to push himself to the limits in the desert. But adventures are dangerous.
Yeah. And it would have been like, that's his personality. He would, like, to me, that the idea of doing that, I wouldn't even consider it. No. Because I'm not that personality. But I can. It's not that I can't put myself in his shoes and understand, well, that type of personality would be drawn to that type of experience seeking and want to challenge himself in that way. Plus, there could have been a little bit of an overconfidence bias, where I've achieved so many things and have had massive success, so I can do if I can do that, I can do this.
Yeah, I'm a winner.
I'm a winner. I can do this. So then, in that kind of situation, people kind of tend to under prepare for things that are different, because they think, they think they're just ready to go and can do anything, because all of the indications have been in other areas that, yeah, you can do that. You can be a high school state champion wrestler after very little years of training. You can become a UFC champion very quickly in your career. So yeah, of course you can go and do anything. So it can cause people that overconfidence bias, that you kind of underestimate the likelihood of this not working out. And that can be a factor as well.
Well, it is a fascinating episode. He was a fascinating man, and he lived an incredible life. But thank you for this, David. In these conversations around Dark Side, there are still some episodes to go. I'm going to try to bring you in on War Machine and maybe a couple others too. So thank you for this, my friend. It's great to see you, and thanks for these fascinating insights.
My pleasure.
Malachy, my man, how are you doing, brother?
Doing very good. How about yourself?
I am good. You're a dude who thinks different. You see the world different. You do jiu-jitsu different. When you first got to know Evan Tanner, was he like that? Is he like you that way?
I would say he's a little bit more quiet, a little bit more brooding, but yeah, I think he thinks differently for sure. He's definitely a different guy when it comes to the world in general. So like training and doing different stuff like that, he's interesting, but more so his path of training. So like he had a routine that he drank like a 2-gallon Mountain Dew every weekend before fights. It was like, as long as you do that, as long as you don't stop whatever you're doing. That was his phrase. If you're drinking 2 gallons of Mountain Dew, don't stop drinking 2 gallons of Mountain Dew. So, I mean, he had some interesting insights of like how to do things differently. And also the paleo stuff. I think he was like the first guy to cutting edge on paleo, which is like, he's like, hey, sometimes you're going to eat fish, sometimes you're not. So sometimes we just ate like greens and nuts, and then sometimes we caught a fish, like, theoretically caught a fish, and it's like, oh well, we don't have fire, so you have to eat the fish raw. So some interesting stuff like that for sure.
Man, I find you to be a fascinating cat. I knew this would be an interesting conversation, but you've already hit me with 2 liters of Mountain Dew and raw fish.
Yes, sir.
And this, I mean, you two must have been weird dudes hanging out together when you first met Evan Tanner back in those days.
Yeah, I would say, like, especially the way, like, me being young, I was around 21 and 22. And, like, I thought of him as old, which is crazy, which I think he was like 35, maybe. So like that, to me, that was like, he's an old dude. Like, he knows what he's doing. He's a grown up, but yeah, I think just a lot of things about myself pissed him off. Cause like, like when you're a 21-year-old, you don't know your boundaries all the time. And he was a very boundary person. Like, like you do this, you don't do that. Like you act like this, you don't act like that. And maybe he was hypocritical on some of those things, but it was for a 21 or 22-year-old that's like, also kind of messed up, not messed up, let's say eccentric.
Yes.
That, we would rub each other the wrong way often and get into like slight not arguments, more of like disputes where we would argue over Thai food. Like we go to a place and like, man, I don't think you should be doing it like that.
Who pulled the knife on who?
Evan pulled the knife on Loden. Kincaid. It pulled the knife on me. So I was there. This was one of the arguments. It was just when his fiance left him. And it was just like a very drunk, stupid thing to say, like, fuck that bitch. Like somebody said, fuck, and Loden, I don't blame Loden because Loden's messed up and he's not reading the scenario right. He's not reading that this is a sad conversation over that this is like a, fuck, don't worry about that girl, man. She's no good for you, bro. Like, move on. It was a different conversation. And he said that stuff, and I just saw it, like, Evan just eyes like glaze over. I'm like, oh shit. Yeah. So then that was the knife pull.
What other crazy? I mean, I've seen the episode. People watching this now, some of them may have seen it. And you've got some wild stories about that era. But like, what are some of the stories you didn't tell us? Like, what are some of the craziest moments you guys spent together?
I mean, I would say, so one of the funniest things was like, and like, I was like, man, I should have included this, but like, I didn't want to, like, I was kind of like persevering myself to a degree, you know. Sometimes you're like, hey, I'm still alive. Like, I don't want to talk trash on the dead, but I'm still alive, so I don't want to get myself so much trouble either. So, you know, but there was a time where we were at a bar, and then these guys invited us over to a birthday party, and the birthday parties, of course, I think it's Portland, so they're in their mid-20s or something like this. And I was very, very drunk, and he was very drunk as well. But I walked through to get a beer while everybody was singing happy birthday to the girl whose party it was. And like, you know, like, I'm like, excuse me. As like, happy birthday. And I'm like, and I'm reaching for a beer in the refrigerator, and the song ended, and they're like, you know, that was really messed up. Everybody was wishing her a happy birthday. Why couldn't you wish her a happy birthday? I'm like, I don't give a fuck about her birthday. Like, you know, this is a drunk me thinking this. And then so they got really, really pissed about that, and they threw me and Evan out of the party. And we're already drunk. I don't know what ride we got there, but we're walking down the highway, and everyone was like, man, why couldn't you just wish her a goddamn happy birthday? And we ended up sleeping in the park. And I don't remember how we did. I just woke up in a park, and he was gone. I was gone. And I thought he left me in the park. And I took one way, and then I'm like pissed, like muttering to myself, like, God damn it, man. Like drop me off in a park and leave me there. Like, I've never slept in a park in my life. And then I see him come around the other side of, like, there's like a 2-street, you know, like this is like here, and like we're meeting each other. And he's like, I was like, where were you? I'm like, yeah, where were you? He's like, I looked and you weren't there. He's like, I looked and you weren't there. So I guess we both woke up in different areas of the park and then walked the opposite sides of the park until we got to one another in the morning. But yes, because I didn't wish her a happy birthday, and he would never let that go. He's like, you know what? It's better just to wish somebody a happy birthday, even if you don't know them.
Maybe this is a good lesson for all of us. I don't know. When you think back to a moment like that, like, you know, misadventures, like, you know, meandering out into the dark, into the wilderness, like Evan used to talk about. Today, you've got a super successful gym and online business and all kinds of cool shit. And Evan, you know, ultimately passed away. It's strange how life goes that way. That one wrong twist, and we're not where we are, you know?
I think Evan was more committed to the world than I was, if that makes sense. Like to the vibrations of the world. Like there's some people that, like, and I don't know, you know, like, maybe, like, I'm not going to pretend like I'm like being successful and having a gym and having people, you know, respect your jiu-jitsu and stuff like that isn't amazing. It is a good feeling, but at the same time, sometimes it's an empty feeling too. And I think Evan would have, in my place, if Evan would have done what I was doing, I think he would feel empty in a way, because he wanted to fight for his money. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. He didn't want to have to, you know, like, I have a kids class in 40 minutes, right? So I can't do exactly what Evan would want to do. Like, what Evan would want to do is, so him being not on a time schedule, him being able to pick up and leave and take a motorcycle out to Washington to get training and then drop back down to Vegas. And that's his kind of vibration of like living. And so, like, yeah, mine took a bump in a different way because of fear of, Well, also because so I injured myself before I really could do anything that I ever wanted to do. You know, I injured my neck while I was training at Top Team, and I had to get a neck surgery, and that didn't work, and so it was just kind of like me digging for some kind of gratification, some kind of recognition, something kind of like, hey, I'm skilled. Here it is. Like, somebody take this. Whereas, I think he was the same way in fighting, the same way in how he expressed himself. I think if he didn't have the attention that he had that he'd be without it. Like, he'd be without a lot of, like, the way MySpace operated for him was a way for him to be important, because when you're a fighter at that point in that stage in the game, unless you're Chuck Liddell, right? Unless you're this or that, like, it's a pretty basic and normal life. I mean, a lot of guys knew him, and a lot of people had no idea who he was, so it's not like, and then on the internet, people can all find you in that one spot. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, look, here's a UFC fighter. Here's a UFC fighter that's actually engaging with his audience, rather than you have somebody like Vanderlei Silva, or you have somebody like Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, where those guys don't really even have to communicate with their fans in order to communicate with their fans. So,
yeah. You know what's wild, Malachy, is I really wanted I find you to be a fascinating individual, and you are. And you had experience with both Kimbo and Evan Tanner as they came up. And I wanted you to be in both of those episodes, and you're wonderful in both of them. But I never realized this odd connection. Kimbo was a big, the first YouTube star. And Evan communicated with the world heavily on MySpace. What is it about similarity of these two that they were connecting in these early stages of media like that? Do you see a connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that you look at Kimbo and everybody was shocked when we saw the YouTube Kimbo fight. You know what I mean? Like, there was if you were on the MMA underground, I mean, that was like, I'm not sure how many people are on the underground now, but I'm not on the underground for like over 15 years. So, but it was the place to go. Like, that was where news came out. That's where news actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like, somebody would call somebody out on a fight, and they would get the fight, and another fighter would show up and be like, yeah, we're fighting. And that's how a fight would happen in the UFC, But it was one of those things where I think everybody saw Kimbo, and it was insane to see a man take the punches that he took just with his hands down, and then to be a bully on like let's run this, like all the things and all the things that go along with it. And then you have Evan, who's I think he maybe socially he was fine. He could talk, he was a social person, but not to the extent he was social on social media. Like, his social abilities on social media were way above that of what he did in person. So I think he enjoyed finding out who he attracted to himself, like the people that he attracted to himself. And I think that apart from Kimbo, people found Kimbo. Like, so there's not a lot of people know, but I was fighting for Cage Fury, and Felix Martinez put me in charge of finding a fight that would be a pay-per-view fight for them. Now, and then so I got in touch with Kimbo's manager, Icy Mike, and pretty much got the ball rolling with them and the matchmaker, Gary Marino. And I don't think that he should have fought. I think that was the reason why Cage Fury went under, is because they ended up paying Ray Mercer some ridiculous amount. But I thought you could put Kimbo against any street tough and people would have shown up. You know what I mean? Like, that they didn't need to fight Ray Mercer. He didn't need to fight any of this. You just needed him to fight some guy who's like had knockouts on his record, or was just as big and scary. But so the world went out and found Kimbo. And Kimbo was so I think that, like, Evan had to go out and find the world to kind of complete himself. And I think Kimbo needed that too, for his family and the longevity of his life, not his life, of his legacy, his family. And then when I say his legacy, I don't mean his fighting legacy. I mean his children, you know, like who are the most important to him, because that was the biggest thing with Kimbo, is that he brought his wife and his daughter to the fight. He flew economy, you know, to make sure that they came with him to the fight. He had dinner with when other people wanted him to go, and like, you know, they want to show off. It's like a horse, you know what I mean? Like sometimes a fighter, I tell this a lot of times, that for investors and different things like that, like some people have show ponies, you know what I mean? And that's where they lose their money in. They say, well, I have my money invested in this and I'm losing money, but this is how it has a tax write-off for me. Some people have fighters and that's their tax write-off, but they want to take those guys to dinner. They want to like call somebody and be like, hey, you know, like we're doing this business thing. Do you want to have dinner with me, you, and Kimbo? You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like the show pony, the thing. But he was more on the side of like, well, he's going to have dinner with his family instead, or he's going to, you know, like what he wants to do is he was a little bit more pulled away from the like the attention bubble. Like he got enough of it. When we were in the airport, I swear, I don't think anybody has gotten as many requests for autographs and pictures and things like that than in the airport that I was with him changing planes. Because when we change planes, man, like there's no hiding Kimbo.
Yeah.
You can't hide that guy. You know what I mean? You just can't.
Maliki,
So
Boss Rutan said the exact same thing. Boss Rutan said anyone who spoke about Kimbo back in that era said it was just wherever he went, he was the most famous person in the world. And half the people had never heard of YouTube. But if you had heard of YouTube, what did you know about? You knew about Kimbo Slice. And that's what Evan Tanner was reaching out into MySpace in the same kind of time. I never made that connection between those two like that, but there was something wild going on there.
Yeah. I think it was the first time that celebrities could interact with. So now you got celebrities interacting with normal people all the time, to a degree. You know what I mean? They choose who they interact with. You know, like they choose the IG model. At least with these basketball players. You know what I mean? Like you hear them getting in trouble, and now they have a baby with another Instagram model that had a baby with a different basketball player. Well, you know, like this is a place where like. There's a possibility that you could engage with your favorite human being as a part, or any of your people that you find fascinating, as where it was before. I remember as a kid writing letters to like Harrison Ford for an autograph. You know what I mean? Like, then you had to write it to a P.O. box, and the P.O. box maybe got to you, and there was no like, sometimes you would get a letter back. 9 times out of 10, you just got what you asked for, which was like an autograph picture.
Yeah.
You know, but there was just, how'd you get in touch with guys before, unless you lived in that time era and you were in that space? And MMA is a very weird thing. You can still walk in most places and meet a world champion.
Yeah.
Maybe not Khabib, maybe not Conor McGregor. You know, like, but I guarantee let me just think of a champion.
If you go into to Florida, you can see Jorge Masvidal training tomorrow.
Yep.
You can see him in there
walking out
training.
to the car, right?
Yeah.
And you can go in, you can talk to him as he goes to his car, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's a very, and even more so, like even before then, like I remember guys would come in to Top Team with like autographs, to get autographs from Bigfoot, to get autographs from this guy, you know, and you know what they were doing? They were selling it on eBay.
Yeah, of course they were. Maliki, thank you for hanging, man. We're going to do this more. I love chatting with you, but I'll let you get back to your kids' class soon. But before I do, if Evan Tanner had come out of the desert that day, I know we're just making it up in our mind, but where do you think he would have gone? And what do you think the next weeks and months and years of his life might have looked like? What would it look like if he was here today?
So that's an interesting question, because I don't like, so I hadn't had really contact with Evan during that period of time of him sobering himself up to him, like where the boat got he sank the boat, got sobered up, and then was going to ride through the desert. And I brought up kind of like was Point Break, where like you kind of know so he knew about the electronics and the satellite. He knew that there was things like that that could save you, right? So I remember because he was going over this kind of stuff. He was going to do like a wooded trail or something like this, and he knew that there was things that for a certain amount of money that you could hit a button and it would send an SOS to a satellite, and the satellite would then give your location and would send rescue. I'm not sure if it was I'm pretty sure he did not want to die. I think he was too embarrassed to get help if he did, and he would figure out a way and it would be just another story. I'm not sure if he would be sober or clean, to tell you the truth. You know what I mean? Because it was only a small amount of time that he was sober, and he was in pain, a lot of emotional pain. And he had a really bad vice of drinking. I think he could be a really good coach. I think he could be like Bo Jackson, where Bo Jackson, nobody knows where Bo Jackson is. Just recently, I saw an interview with Bo Jackson. That dude is living a normal life. But you see all these other celebrities all the time, all over the paper, all over this, all over that. You don't hear about Bo Jackson at all. That's one of the most huge, like giant stars of like ever, of like the 80s and early 90s was Bo Jackson. You know, Bo knows. And he's living in a small town with a ranch, and he doesn't go out and do much. I can see Evan being that way as well. Maybe trying to write some books. Maybe he pop up on Twitter and tell somebody like disagree with the way somebody's viewing something. But I definitely think it would be secluded. I definitely think if he was coaching, he would be coaching just a small amount of fighters here and there. Or he may not be sober. That's the thing is that it's a very hard, because when we lost him, he was in a turning point of his life. We don't know what was after that, you know? So.
Well, he was a fascinating dude, as are you, Malachi Friedman. You got 500,000 followers on Instagram. People should definitely follow you if they're interested in jiu-jitsu or philosophy or anything. Thank you, man. I look forward to chatting with you again. Lots of love.
Thank you so much, man.
All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening on Vice Podcasts. The Final Days of Evan Tanner. It is on Vice every Wednesday. Dark Side of the Cage. Just a brilliant series. We're getting such amazing feedback on it, and it was just a joy to be a part of it. Next week, we'll come back with Cage Talk with The Ultimate Fighter.
What can I tell you about Evan Tanner?
He was this self-trained lone wolf champion in the ring.
Next level.
Loved books. He wanted more than just fighting.
Had a very strong mind.
He was drinking.
He started spiraling. Evan lost his mind.
I plan on going so deep into the desert that any failure of my equipment could cost me my life.
He called and he goes, "Wade, I think I'm dying of thirst." "What, Evan?" And we lost the signal.
I can't.
Dark Side of the Cage. New episode Wednesday at 10 on Vice.